down, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
The cost of toys is often a fickle thing. It's hard to determine what is worthy of its price and what isn't. Double Dealer is hollowed out to oblivion and scrappy as hell. Yet shortly after, Grimlock was able to deliver on the massive Chunkitude. Whether a toy is worth its asking price is determined by a lot of factors. Complexity of design, how many units are being produced, viability of reuse later down the track, popularity of character, then throw the aftermarket in the mix and it's a whole extra level of fuckery. Some random lugnut toy that is widely released suddenly costs upwards of $300 dues. But an employee exclusive gift goes for $40 because nobody cares. There are some toys that reach levels of expense so high that they'll never be worth the price people ask of them, and others where you wonder how you're able to get them so absurdly cheap. Discussing toys that fit into weird categories is difficult because how can you quantify whether a figure is worth what people ask for it? If a figure is so expensive that it got people laughing in disbelief behind their phone screens and monitors, can you so easily write off its price as absurd? Or the opposite, can you write off the genuine concerns these people have at price gouging? It's honestly fascinating. How can a figure so small generate so much discourse? Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Mattel Creations Hot Wheels HXT02 Optimus Prime. The designation number apparently means nothing, aside from some supposed maths nonsense that spells out Optimus Prime. Seems a bit silly to me, but hey, at least the designer was having fun. Honestly, it's kinda surprising we even got something like this at all, given how against each other Hasbro and Mattel have been for the majority of their existence in the market space. Often Hasbro's been flat out unable to do certain things, like give Dino an accurate vehicle mode, specifically because Mattel is so draconian with their license. And I'm sure there's gotta be an equivalent with something Hasbro did. Honestly, when the prospect first came up, I was expecting something more along the lines of the Takara Bandai collaboration, where we got Gundam-colored Zoids vehicle, and Hello Kitty Beyblades. Oh, and nothing featuring Transformers, mind you. Heaven forbid we bridge the gap and make something that wouldn't be possible otherwise! Under the confusing and tumultuous rules of IP management, it makes sense why the only transforming products they offered would be a limited release, under the Mattel Creations storefront. I'll get into what this release strategy entails later, but for a basic rundown, it's sort of like HasLab or P Bandai, closer to the latter though, unfortunately. Point is, the release system makes sense in concept, doubly so as a wider release would steal sales from both Missing Link and the upcoming Legacy Deluxe. Side note, people kept asking me to do these as a three-way review, but aside from not bothering with Missing Link, HXT02 is so fundamentally different from the other two that comparing wouldn't make sense. As for who was at the helm of the project, it was produced by Manson Chung, a Hot Wheels designer with over 2 decades of experience at the company. Would have been neat to get someone with Transformers history on the project, like with LEGO Optimus Prime, but given it's basically just a shrunken down version of the G1 toy, it wasn't particularly necessary. The work was practically already done years ago. It's basically a copy-paste job. And that's basically how the vehicle mode feels. It's the G1 alt mode, almost to the T. Done entirely in diecast with a fully chrome finish. Almost everything has been meticulously copied over. All the... Why does it say rivets? Rivets? How the f*** does that even make that typo? Almost everything has been meticulously copied over. All the rivets, the same style of grille, near identical windows, it's all here and it's all done exceptionally well. At a glance, the only thing that's particularly different is the proportions from the front, which compared to the G1 original is actually slightly shorter and fatter. I don't think it's for the sake of accuracy, as the G1 toy is already an approximation of the actual truck, lacking the subtle sloping, which is something the non-transforming Optimus Prime actually does manage to do. Okay, no, I got that wrong. It was actually the Jada Toys version. I didn't really pay much attention to the Hot Wheels one. Whoopsie! For the 5 people in the audience who actually care, by the way, I'm using my copy of the old T4 variant for comparisons. I got this off Marketplace for a 10 or 8 years ago with 0 accessories, I slapped toy hacks on it, and I love it to bits. Regardless, in this chromed finish, it looks absolutely gorgeous. Not everything is chromes. There are a few joints here and there where the pieces have to move, and those are left unpainted. But they're barely noticeable, and structurally it makes sense. It's not exactly pulling the patchwork Golden Lagoon effect, not even close. Also, due to this thing being basically 95% diecast, or whatever modern equivalent, this guy feels weighty and solidly built. It's not a sort of compensatey diecast that adds false weight to account for poor construction. This thing is built like a tank, and when combined with the rubber tires, it makes it really fun to roll around. Also helps that the rubber tires guys are nice and solid, unlike some previous examples seen on this channel at this scale. From what I can gather, the only two sections here that aren't die-cast are the wheels, which makes sense, they have to be pinned in a specific way, and the fist ports, which would likely cause tolerance issues. The rest is super premium, both in weight and build. The all mode is very much what you see is what you get. It's hard to deny they've put their money where their mouth is. I'm not going to pretend it's perfect though, because there are issues that come from the way this is manufactured. You may notice in some of these shots, the truck cab tilts ever so slightly forwards. You may also notice that the legs seem ever so slightly misaligned. Go to the bottom and you'll see why. The hip joints on my copy are misaligned, making the gas canisters always push up against the back of the elbow. The damn thing hasn't been punched properly. It's a case of the QC gremlin. I've asked around and it's not something that affects all copies, but it is something that affects a decent chunk of them. Given how quickly these were put into production after the funding period, even shipping before the projected release dates, methinks they didn't do a proper check on them. Of course, there would have been a simple solution to avoid this entirely. The G1 toy actually sits the forearms a bit further forward to allow ease of conversion. The Hot Wheels version doesn't, making it completely flush. It's probably something Manson just happened to miss, and I don't blame him for it. But the combination of this change and the QC f***ery isn't a particularly fun one. It may not be something that affects your figure, but if you're buying loose and secondhand, I'd highly recommend asking the seller first. Beyond that, I do think there's one element that's a teensy bit accurate to a fault. The original toy was designed to hold Diaclone pilots, but without any of them being carried over to the Transformers release, fans took to shoving in the fists in there instead. Hot Wheels recreates this with an opening window section, but due to the fists being ridiculously tiny, they just rattle around in there. The torso doesn't even do anything otherwise. Hell, this is actually how the fists are packaged upon first cracking this thing open. With something this small, it would have been much better to have ports in there to keep the fists from getting lost. I mean, this thing is ridiculously small, basically going for smaller than core class size. You gotta make modifications when you go this small, like removing the parts forming entirely, or at least redoing it in a way that doesn't lead to parts vanishing into the ether. Beyond that though, not much to complain about with this mode. It set out to recreate the 84 Classic, and it did so to an absurdly high level of class. In fairness, it was a pretty easy task to achieve, but credit where credit is due, they did a damn good job. And hey, as someone who was obsessed with small scale, this was always going to be up my alley. It's just a nice figure to drive around on your desk, and if this is the mode you're going to keep it in, there's not enough to dissuade you. Of course, if you're gonna keep it in one mode, you might as well get the non-transforming one, as it's cheaper and comes with a trailer, but I'm not one to dictate other people's purchasing habits. Weird this figure isn't compatible with this trailer though. Beyond the different scales, they both use male ports. Kinda weird they didn't think of it, but given how many trailers I have lying around anyway, yeah, I'm probably good. Welcome to the most useless transformation video in history. It's like a vitamin, but for uselessness. If you've ever messed with G1 Prime, you know exactly what you're getting into here. Like, it's not even G1 with certain stylizations, it is just flat out G1. And that's okay, because G1 Prime is a classic conversion. Not all G1 transformations are created equally, but Prime is one of the greats, so nothing to complain about here. Well, aside from the parts forming, but what can you do? First of all, the arms do an Optimus by moving out to the sides with the ball joints and the shoulder joints. They've actually got the elbows on ball joints now, so that's a nice little upgrade. Allows them to retain their articulation at such a small scale. You bring the legs down like so. I think they're supposed to split, but on this copy they don't. The behind the scenes information claims that the designer put them in there, but I'm just not seeing it. And it's ironic considering the G1 version did actually have that. One thing he did add though was new foot mechanisms. They actually pull out and push up. This is actually quite lovely. It's a wonderful way to keep them in place in truck mode. Though weirdly on my copy, when I take out this one, it's got some weird sticky substance on it. Yeah, you can sort of see it in there. It's some weird goo. I think it might be grease or something, or maybe the paint didn't cure properly, or maybe the chrome didn't cure properly. I don't know. It's a bit icky and I don't like it. It's probably bad QC. Anywho, the head just flips over like that. One thing I don't really mention later, but the head actually does turn, unlike the G1 original, which is very nice. And last but not least, the fists plug in. And I'm not a fan of this. I really think these should have been included. There is actually a precedent for this because the smallest transforming version did have them included in the design. And yeah, that was mostly out of necessity because this is a lot bigger than that, probably wouldn't need to. But it's the one thing that should have been left in the past, at least for my own personal tastes. I get why they did it, I just don't personally agree with it. I think that's the one thing they should have left. Well, that and added proper housing for the fists and the torso, because it just doesn't, it's a bit silly. So yeah, in the end, he does an Optimus, and I mean that as a compliment. As I said, the G1 conversion is one of the best G1 conversions they've done. Optimus Prime is classic G1, so to recreate it on a small scale exactly, yeah, it's kind of neat. Though if you're just getting this to experience the G1 toy and nothing else, then you might as well be better off with the G1 original. Or Missing Link, or the upcoming Deluxe. Either of those will do you just fine. You gotta get in for everything he does, not just the conversion. Though credit where credit is due, they did the transformation okay, which is kinda neat, considering how bad Hot Wheels has been in the past. Gotta give them kudos. Got to give them kudos. In robot mode, I'm starting to notice something that's a little frustrating. I'm getting the feeling that the Hot Wheels team is a lot more adept at adapting vehicle designs than robot ones. I mean, we've seen history of it with Mattel's weird attempts to capitalize on the various Transformers crazes. But with this figure, while there's a lot good, there's also a lot weird. The overall look is arguably even more gorgeous than the vehicle mode. It feels a lot larger than it actually is, and commands a presence not even the G1 original was capable of. The shorter torso actually makes him feel a lot meaner, less square than the 84 version. Or 86. Look, I don't know what year the T4 variant came out. I just gave it to a G1 expert who told me it wasn't a KO and looked at the number on the back of the head. The one thing that becomes way more visible in this mode is the piercing blue on the legs. You could see it in truck mode, but not to this level. Beyond being super durable, it's just mesmerizing to look at. In many cases, it actually draws your attention away from everything else. This is, without a doubt, the most beautiful blue I've ever seen on a Transformers adjacent product. Fun fact, this kind of metallic deco was actually why I bought Tensegrity Prime a few years back. Yeah, turns out the stock photos just lied. There wasn't a metallic finish at all. Lying f***ers aside, it's really good to see such a lovely deco finally realized in physical form. Combined with the metal construction, you can really see where they put their budgets. You could practically use this as a paperweight with how well it's built. Not that you get any work done with the prospect of messing with him. Yeah, people often forget G1 Optimus Prime was actually a pretty decently articulated figure for the time. The legs didn't do much, but the upper body had a lot more than his wave mates. You'll actually be able to pose this guy in some decent ways, especially since they went the smallest transforming route and swapped out the ratchets for ball joints. It's nothing too crazy, but if you want something more dynamic, he can do a little bit. This is quite a lovely robot mode in the looks department. Mattel does pretty decent sculpt work under the Hot Wheels team, and they've brought over the design quite well. As I said earlier, however, I get the feeling they're better at translating vehicle designs than robot ones, because most of the issues I have with this figure relate to this mode. Of course, you have the legs buckling from earlier, but that doesn't affect functionality that much. According to the Mattel designer, there's supposed to be a hip shifting mechanism added here, but I don't see it. Ironic, considering the G1 toy actually does have one. But whatever, I can live with that. It's not that big of a deal. What I do take more issue with, however, is the paintwork. Not the chrome finish, mind you. Almost everything to do with that is gorgeous. Almost anyway. No, it's everything else. This thing has tamper grafts to mimic the original stickers, and all of them are either misaligned, chipping after minimal transformation, or both. The rest of this figure looks super premium, but these things look and feel like they came from a bootleg. I can't even see the Autobot symbols properly, blending into the rivets. Are these faction sigils or the scribbles in Vladimir Putin's notebook? And the paint on the head sculpts, I don't think I've seen anything this sloppy in a very long time. Not even Zeta was this bad. The faceplate is shifted 2 postcodes to the left, and the eyes are so splotchy that it might as well be based on the IGA version. No, not that IGA. The IGA where they had to paint over the lead due to safety reasons. Seriously, Hasbro was able to do this so much better at 20 bones. Scratch that, they're able to do it better at a tenner. Hell, I don't even think I've seen an Authentics figure with face paint this bad. They put all this effort into the vehicle mode, but now the robot almost feels like an afterthought. Something the packaging also exhibits. I don't usually talk about toy boxes as I tend to throw them out, but this thing is really stupid. The box is designed to display in either truck or robot configurations, but because they're using a plastic shell, Prime can't actually fit in robot mode. It just doesn't work. I don't want to try and force it in, as that would potentially damage the finish, but come on, man. This is a pretty big oversight. At over $100, couldn't you afford some foam instead? Even the gun feels like an afterthought. It's not that he can't hold it properly, that's not my issue. That's G1 accurate, it's actually kind of funny. It's just, this thing feels so light and cheap in comparison to everything else. I just get the feeling they wanted to make a truck that transforms rather than an Optimus Prime specifically. They didn't even take into consideration the chipping on the chrome. Yeah, remember how I said most of the chrome is durable? Well, the silver has started to chip on both the thighs, where it brushes up against the transformation joints, and the fist cavities, where the fists enter their cavities. Like some fist cavity. It's supposed to take years of constant transformation to get these to start flaking. What's your problem? Horrified the smokestacks will be next. Jesus! So, Yeah, this figure has a lot of jank. It feels like they had a few things they wanted to do. Make him diecast, make him metallic, make him accurate to the original. By the time they did all that, all of their focus and dev time was taken up, and they just rushed out the remaining shit like the tamper graphs and final fit and finish. So as a toy, it's sort of hard to give a proper score. There's so much to love about this figure, but there's a few things that you can tell were either missed or flat out not cared about. As a toy in a vacuum, I could still recommend it, but no toy exists in a vacuum. This is where we get to the final hurdle with this figure, how it's obtained in the first place. How much would you pay for this figure in Aussie dollary dues? 60? 70? 100? Try 120 plus postage. Already that's bad, but that's not actually the price you're paying for it. If you have committed the heinous crime of living in Australia, well you get to pay 140 instead. Plus postage costs 35 instead of a tenner. Weirdly, they changed the site later to say it was $5 less though, so I don't know what's up with that. Not like there are any plans to release the bugger again. Regardless, Aussies paid this price. I know they did because most posts complained about how hard it was to get this fella. Guess nobody watched my freight forwarding video because I sure as shit didn't pay that much. Slight problem though, you can't pay that anymore. Mattel Creations isn't that much like Hasbro Pulse. I really just used it as a point of reference. It's similar in the sense that it releases exclusive products direct to consumer, but there's one key difference here. Artificial scarcity. With, say, a HasLab release, you have a window when you can order, and there's no rush. Not so here. Mattel functions a lot closer to Premium Bandai, where there's a specific drop with purposefully low production numbers. Once it's gone, that's it. No chance. At the time, I happened to be sick with the flu, so coincidentally, my sleep schedule was f***ed anyway. I went for the thing because I was up at 3 AM, but by the time I checked out, it was already gone. Couldn't have been more than 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Let's cut the bullshit. This is a scummy way to release products. The reason you never see me criticizing HasLab is because compared to business practices like this, they're practically saints. And this is purposeful. It's not that they couldn't make more. It's not that they couldn't have made them made to order. This is purposeful. This is calculated. I mean, just look at the Bumblebee they released at retail. Deliberately stocking 1 per case of 72, making it the rarest figure they've widely released for the entire year. Oh, but you can buy this stylized, uglier version if you like. But you won't. You want the G1 version. You'll even go through eBay scalpers to get it. Fortunately, I got lucky and found one. This was an impulse buy, but for anyone looking for one, they're basically The current going rate on eBay for Prime, sold listings not active, is $250, and no figure of this size is worth that much. I bought this figure at American retail cost because I adore small scale figures, and having a shrunken down version of the G1 toy in full diecast with a metallic finish sounded amazing to me. At that cost, I'd say he's overpriced, but just barely. But at the Australian price, no. No, he's just too much. And on the aftermarket, I'm sorry, but get f***ed. But hey, if you don't want to deal with the aftermarket, you can always go through official means on the licensed Mattel store on AliExpress for $300. Get f***ed, please. So all this makes reviewing a figure in this situation difficult. Is it worth it? Is it not? Well, that's the thing. If you actually look at this, functionally, this review is pretty pointless. There will be a lot of people who watch and, well, I won't say enjoy, but definitely tolerate this video. And 99% of you won't buy this. 95% of you probably don't even want it. You'll be using this as a reason to see the toy, or just see what I have to say on it. So as a functional review, this isn't fulfilling its purpose. It's not convincing anyone to buy or not to buy it. Anyone who wants this Prime has likely made up their mind already. They're either saving for it, putting it in the position of a grail, or they have it already. This does mean I've basically made a worthless video, but hey, what's new, pussycats? Whoa. So, while all that context needs to be taken into account, ultimately, I can't say I dislike this figure. What it does really well. There are faults, and those are enough to turn a lot of people off, but not me. I think a low 4 ultimately serves this figure well. It just barely scrapes by a 3 to reach that score, but it ultimately does earn it. If you want a G1 Prime in a small scale, there are way better ones on the market. New Age, Dr. Wu, the original smallest transforming version. Hell, for all my complaints, the core class is way better value for money. This Prime, however, is something specifically tuned to my batshit tastes, and I can't say I regret purchasing it in the slightest. He's got a lot of jank, but I'd sooner take this out and mess with it than I would something like Magic Square or even Generation Toy. They could have designed this a lot better. They should have released this in a more ethical manner, but I am glad to have it. He's not for most people, but he is for me. And please, Mattel, never do this again. But as always, fandom public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on cross-company collaborations below. What's your favorite collab figure Transformers has ever been attached to? What's your least favorites? Have you ever had a figure that was definitely not worth the price, but you still wanted it anyway? And as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time! From the outset, I feel like I've been Collaborative's biggest hater. From the very first release, I've been riding on the shitting train due to one simple factor. The focus just is not there. Why make any of the toys actually good from the ground up when you can instead only focus on the vehicles and nothing else? Never mind that Studio Series does this literally on a quarterly basis, why would you actually bother putting any effort into any other mode when people are just gonna leave it in vehicle mode and call it a day? Even when the franchises are all in-house, they seem to f up every single robot mode and conversion time and time again. And at an inflated price point that makes you wonder why you wouldn't just buy a standard Transformer. And sure, there are exceptions to the rule. There are rare times when they somehow luck out and deliver an actually good experience. Usually when they retool an existing mold and it's so good it practically can't be ruined, as hard as they try. But more often than not, it's an easy skip for me. And yet, irrespective of logic, I always find myself being drawn back to them. What if they actually did well this time? What if they actually improved things? What if somehow it was all ultimately worth it? Well, perhaps it's actually even worse if lightning does strike, because it'll have me second guessing constantly in the future as time goes on. Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Transformers Collaborative Hot Wheels, Twin Mill, and Bone Shaker. They didn't bother giving these cool names or anything, they're just the same names as the original cars. Still, with names that cool, do you really need anything else? Now, some of y'all might realize this isn't actually the first time Hot Wheels has crossed over with Transformers. We had the general car range based on existing Transformers characters, though those were a nightmare to find given the Movieverse range never released in Australia and the G1 range, minus a few randoms, was scalped to hell and back. I spent months looking for a Hot Wheels Optimus Prime and gave up the day I saw a scalper walking out with 20 of them at my local Big W. Christ, I haven't seen that shit since Earthrise Netflix Soundwave. Then we had the Mattel Creations release, a fun novelty that didn't really hold a candle to any other similar releases on the market. Horribly overpriced at a base level, even worse if you bought it through proper Aussie means, and even worse on the aftermarket due to horrendous artificial scarcity. And all that for a toy that, let's face it, wasn't even that good. But I'm not going to go into too much detail as I've basically done a full video on it already, but to summarize, if you missed out on the 7-minute drop, you're not missing much. Thing is though, none of these were what Transformers fans actually wanted. If you asked any fan on the street, they'd just ask you why we didn't have proper collaborative releases of Hot Wheels' most iconic vehicles. In retrospect, perhaps that was the point. Would any of these honestly have sold if these two came out first? I don't really think so. So they rightfully, in a marketing sense, held off on making these, and honestly, better late than never. Because goddamn the wait was worth it, at least in vehicle mode. Knowing next to nothing about Hot Wheels aside from vague memories of an old movie series that I watched at a friend's mother's holiday home over crust pizza, and the fact that Mainframe did something for the franchise and reused the old Beast Wars Megatron model, probably not in the same show mind you. So I'm going into these as standalone vehicles, and as those, my word are they sexy. I guess it makes more sense to start off with Twin Mill, given is the more normal of the two, but I actually got him second, so I'm gonna f around and do the opposite. Bone Shaker turns into a masterful hot rod, not that hot rod, and one that's pushing the Black Convoy effect hard. Based on the original black version of the design debuting in 2006, but featuring far more in the deco category because making this thing entirely in black at this size would probably turn it into Velocitron G2 drag strip, which, no thank you. Now I suppose there's not actually much to say in terms of the quality of collaborative vehicle modes. Usually they're pretty well realized, so this being damn good isn't anything out of the ordinary. It's supposed to be the main focus to keep the collaborating company happy after all. But even so, this is just gorgeous. The black plastic has this subtle gloss to it, so it ends up looking incredibly premium. Matched against the flame tampograph, it's a really striking deco that you don't usually get on stock Transformers. You can't tell me Hot Rod, yes that Hot Rod, pulls anything this hard. The yellow is a little inconsistent and thin in places, but it doesn't usually come across as such on a glance thanks to the red pinstriping. Not often a feature you get to see on mainline figures, if this can even be called that, but very nice to see nonetheless. These flames burst forth from a gorgeous pipe section, curving around the sides and giving this almost the shape of an arrow. The silver that coats them is also fantastic, and it shows up all over the damn place, including the badass skull at the front. really helps to bring out these mean as f details. Love to see it. It's accentuated extremely well with the red and yellow. Again, these applications could be a little stronger, but also again, given the amount of really cases I've seen, this doesn't even scratch the lower levels of the barrel, let alone reach the bottom. Would have liked to have seen some black on the eyes, but they're more so meant to be air intakes, so it makes sense. See, my car knowledge is getting better. I watch the Grand Tour now. I'm absolutely a manly man, oh yes. Silver also dots the piston section at the top and even the rims on the sides. And god damn, these wheels are something else. Bloody huge and rolling incredibly well with their pinned wheels. Though, I guess given Hot Wheels is kinda known for how well they roll, skimping out on pinned wheels would be a pretty awful decision. This is a really lovely car mode with a striking design and paintwork that really brings it to life. They could have easily made this like the original and not bothered to go the extra mile. Because why shouldn't accuracy be put above all else? Why should there be subtle deviations that actually make this thing look like a real car? I'm glad they've taken this a step further, and if anything, most of my complaints come from places where I think they could have gone further. For instance, I adore the interior. It really gives me Beachcomber vibes with the molded seats and the brown finish. But at the same time, couldn't they have gone just a smidge harder on the dashboard? I realize there's not the most space in there with the hinge and all, but couldn't we get a bit more? Couldn't we get a smidge more on the back too? The silver randomly stops, making this whole section look a bit unfinished. And the way the details around the taillights come across is rather toyetic. Maybe all of this comes down to the legal red tape surrounding Mattel, and maybe we should be glad this mode turned out as good as it did. But seeing how great everything else is, I just wish it went over the line. Also, for on floors, I guess the weapons storage is a bit shit. Apparently this is also undocumented. Maybe that's why. Funny Easter egg, but maybe not. Even with holding back in a few areas, though, this is easily one of my favorite alternate modes all year. 2025, that is, not 2026. Not sure when y'all are gonna watch this as the Wi-Fi card on my PC kicked the bucket and is preventing me from accessing Premiere Pro legally. Yes, I shouldn't have legally paid for Adobe, but I'm a lazy git and it was cheap through a deal I got. Whatever the case, this thing is $10 over the recommended retail price of a deluxe. Take, say, $5 of that and give it to Mattel. And even $5 over retail, this is still worth it. Yes, it's smaller than most deluxes, but it's also way denser and chunkier. It feels closer to a figure you'd find releasing in the late 2000s, in build, not size that is. Maybe a lot of that is down to the fact that this is literally a 2000s design, but whatever the case, this is a premium as shit vehicle mode. Though I do guess Bone Shaker is overall a pretty complex design. A lot of his oddities come down to potential sacrifices they'd have to make to get it to work as a transformer. But what about when they cover something far more standard? Twin Mill wasn't one I was actually planning on nabbing initially, for two specific reasons that will become more apparent later. These reasons put me off, making me think this was just another collaborative blunder, and $50 for one of those was a bit too large of a pill for me to swallow. Now $25, $5 above a core class, because the staff put out the wrong price on the shelf. Now that was something I was willing to take a chance on. And already from initial thoughts, I'm glad I did, because wowzers, this is a lovely car mode. Twin Mill's inclusion in the lineup is basically a no-brainer, based on the 1969 classic. Apparently Hot Wheels' first ever original design, not based on anything externally. At least that's what the wiki says, so if that's not entirely true, I look forward to hearing a billion comments about it. For this specific release though, they've gone for the Spectra Flame rendition, just with a healthy dose of striping on the top. Likely so they can sell the original green later down the line. We've already got a Twin Mill redeco leaked for next year, and that seems like a pretty easy spot for it. Nevertheless, this is one delightful car mode. I've seen it compared to both Blur and Point Blank, and yeah, I can see that, to be honest. People have even said it's a better version of those, but I think it's got enough of its own identity for the comparisons to be a tad silly. Still, this is one dynamic racer, with the aerodynamicism turned up to the max. The curvature is great, and the panel lines are minimal. Perhaps that's part of the licensing deal, like many a Studio Series figure had to deal with before, but either way, it's a lovely car. The clear blue is delightful over both the windows and lights. I kinda wish it was deeper with a tinge of neon, but it still looks really nice. The wheels are just the right kind of bulky, this time using the grey with painted tires trick. Still rolls well thanks to the pinned wheels, and it doesn't seem like it'll have paint chipping issues later down the line, so pretty good way to keep the sprue count down, I say. Interestingly, most of the visual interest doesn't come from the base plastic. It seems like it's got a metallic fleck to it, and it does, but it's a lot subtler than you'd expect. And the gloss finish isn't as pronounced as you'd think either. There was actually some slight controversy surrounding this, as the prototype was far more resplendent. And this was a clear cost-cutting move. As someone who went in on Tensegrity Prime for the same reason, I absolutely feel your pain. But no, the main course is easily the paint game, with the Tron line decals making this theme seem almost cyberpunk. They're crisp, bright, and help hide a lot of the blemishes really well. Part of me wishes they'd continue down the sides as well, but the budget was probably already stretched really thin here. Like, again, this is a dense motherfucker. They put a lot of effort into this thing. Like, even the underside is as clean as a whistle. Hell, somewhat on Bone Shaker as well. Was this a stipulation from Mattel? Probably not. Does it have any bearing on the final verdict? No, as people seldom display or play with their figures from the underside. But hey, it's still about as dense as a 2000s harem protagonist. I'd add anime to that sentence, but let's be honest, what other mediums were telling harem stories in the 2000s? Of course, again, he's not without issue, and this time there's a slightly bigger handful of them. For starters, the air intakes on the top really should have had some extra silver on them. When just the pipes on the side do and nothing else does, it seems a smidge unfinished. Guess they had to use that budget on the color matching in the middle, which is almost perfect, mind you, so I do get it. Ironically, it's slightly more resplendent than the rest of the plastic though, which is kind of funny. Secondly, the rest of the paint around this thing is super thin and wispy, with a lot of blue bleed underneath. On both the Autobot symbol and the tail lights, they just look dull, and it's a real shame. The yellow at the front already looks great, and that's an equally difficult color to get right. Just wish they'd done both on the same high level. Thirdly, and this is a personal thing, I'm not a fan of the gaudy Hot Wheels logo on the back. Wasn't a fan of it either on Bone Shaker, but like, it just makes this thing seem a smidge toyetic. Hoping Toy Hacks lets you cover it up somehow, though since I'm probably the only person who doesn't like this, it's kinda doubtful. And finally, the accessories. He comes with 2 blast effects, which I will not use because apparently they cause chipping issues with the silver paint. Did they not think this through? Couldn't they make it standard blast effect compatible? Whatever happened to blast effect compatibility? So many figures these days are just leaving it in the past, and it's like this was one of the coolest features ever. First, they stopped making new blast effects, then they removed the compatibility entirely? Come on, play features are fun. Still though, at the end of the day, this alt mode was a wonderful surprise. The flaws are there, but most of them make sense in the context of the release and can easily be explained away with budgeting and licensing constraints. The density remains great, even if on a slightly lesser level than his wavemate, and design-wise, he contrasts very well. It's a smidge difficult to decide which of the 2 alt modes is nicer. Not that this is a Versus review, mind you. Bone Shaker is a far more solid piece overall, but Twin Mill does look nicer. But at the same time, that does come with a lot more jank, so it's hard to say. Guess I'll just cop out and say I like them both? Yeah, that works. Though, the vehicles were never what turned me off from either initially. They're collaborative figures, of course that's what's going to be the primary focus. No, the reason I was a bit hesitant, as well as the reason I don't tend to go crazy right off the bat, is everything that comes after. Much like the vehicle modes themselves, the transformation feels very 2000s. It's sort of a mixture, the way the parts are very clever, like the original classics figures from the mid to late 2000s, and the modern brilliance, the modern cleanness. It's a perfect blend of classic and modern, and I guess that kinda works for this throwback, being a Hot Wheels crossover. Of course, with Twin Mill, we have to discuss the elephant in the room, the parts forming, and this is what initially put me off this figure. You see, I really didn't want to get this thing when I heard you had to parts form these pieces here, and you do have to. These side parts won't fold out if that doesn't happen, and the chest piece won't fold in either. I thought, well, if that's what they're gonna do, there's no way I'm buying this. But there is one thing I didn't realize. They're not just random parts forming pieces, they are actually weapons. Yeah, you rotate the air intake at the back and it becomes sort of twin-barreled guns here, and that bit also pops off later for the robot mode. So yeah, these are basically weapon parts forming, so you can pretty much throw away that one issue I had out the window. These are fine, you don't have to worry about it. Yippee! And the rest kind of works the way you'd expect. It's sort of simple, but it feels very clever. You want to pull the chest piece up a little bit and use the double hinge to get it out. That will allow you to open up these side panels and untab it from all of that stuff and click it into place there. You can separate this, allowing you to bring this hinge out on both sides. That'll be the ankle tilt right there, but it does also have a ball joint, which means you can rotate these toes towards the front and bring down these heel spurs like so. You'll then notice that there's a slot here and a tab there, and that's how this all locks together like so it doesn't just slide down. I do quite like this Combiner Wars style of leg extension thing that they've been doing all these years. It is way better than sliding rails, and I'm glad this has become the standard. I don't really talk about it enough, I say. Anywho, you want to rotate the waist around, separate the arms down like that, rotate them to the sides there, rotate the chest around 180 degrees, bring this panel up and slot it into place, and then that will slot into place there. Now that is a really cool way to bring the chest into place, and I really hope we get to see this again in future designs. Do kind of wish that's where the Autobot symbol was. Kind of having it on the sides there is a bit silly. Anywho, last but not least, you want to bring these down. They're on several hinges. You just extend all of them, and you rotate them into place like so. Kind of goes to show that Point Blank didn't need to work as complexly as he did. He could have been a lot simpler, but oh well. This is still pretty damn good for the size and works really well. Especially with the way the arms work, that kind of throws back to Classics Mirage with the way they fold in. Combined with the more modern way that the legs work, it's just a brilliant transformation. I quite like this one, if you couldn't guess. Though, out of the two, Bone Shaker is easily my favorite. He pulls the classic vibes even harder and does some really cool things with his panels. They don't necessarily work that great in robot mode, as I'll get into later, but it's still really fun to flip back and forth. It's a great desk toy. Anywho, first thing you want to do is separate these panels from the sides and bring these up like so. That should give you enough clearance to untab the back section and bring it down 90 degrees. We're not going to do everything else yet, because first off we're going to separate these, bring up the seats and move them backwards so that you can use them as heel spurs, which will allow you to fold that panel inwards there, and that will allow you to bring up this panel and use it to cover up the foot on its double hinge. Double octagonal hinges, well that's not octagonal, that is. And then that extends and does the rest. Nice, creative, and unique transformation. If they looked better in robot mode, this will probably be my favorite transformation element of 2025. But again, we'll get into some of that later, but still pretty good. Separate the arms from the sides here. You then come to the top and bring this section open. That will allow you to bring that down and lock it into place. Then bring the arms into place, and they won't lock into place because there's actually two tabs there that go into two slots there. So that will all go together like so and lock into place there. Got to follow that order of operations so that it all works well. You bring the shoulders down like so, rotate out the elbows and the wrists, and all works well there. And last but not least, if you haven't already with these just fold towards the back there. There's no locking tab, and I really wish there was a mechanism to keep them in place, but they sit there and they don't get in the way, and they don't seem like they're going to be load bearing, so it should be okay. So yeah, although these two lead to a bit of mess on both of their respective robot modes, the transformations are very nice. It feels more like they came up with these designs based on how the transformations would work, not try to force the transformation into the whole thing, which is what a lot of modern Transformers do. It is a very nice change of pace, and I am quite grateful for it. I'm grateful that this gives that classic transformation experience that I've been missing for so many years. Though I guess these are classic Hot Wheels cars, so it kind of makes sense. Right off the bat, I really appreciate that these are ground-up new characters. Let's face it, they could have easily made these another Optimus Prime and Megatron, endlessly combining existing ideas because the average consumer will absolutely be more into it. Granted, Takara is way more guilty of this than Hasbro, but still, it could have happened. But no, these fall more into the traditional style of collaborative, giving us original robot modes, which in this day and age is a real treat to see. And furthermore, they're not just simple designs with the hood draped over, which is what put me off a few supposedly quite good releases recently. No, these are brand new, designed fresh from the ground up, with really interesting designs. And Bone Shaker charges forth with a metal as f vibe, looking like a bikey gang member, but one of those based ones that protect victims of domestic abuse and punch turfs in the face. I've seen people say this should be a Decepticon, but aside from likely not wanting to piss off Mattel, who are you to say whose alliance should be whose? What are you, gatekeeping ideologies? The design moves a lot of kibble around really well, and it feels really complete, or at least from the top half. The head sculpt is great, looking like he's wearing a proper rounded face mask, and incorporating the pipes into the head excellently. Crowned off with a killer crest, and you get a nice balance of meanness and friendliness. The torso it sits atop is damn nice, and a lot of the layering and paint actually works to create a more slender physique. Unexpected, but really nice. I've seen a lot of complaints about how low the shoulders are, and yeah, kinda. But when you have the tire shoulder pads, it doesn't really come across that bad at all. And it's a really cool place to put this detail, even if the panels don't really have a solid place to plug into. Not too annoying though, and it gives this a real flowing feeling to the back. Capped off with some really nifty orange forearms with top level paint application in the face of both yellow and red mixed difficulty, and the top half is just a real treat to look at. Great job. Now, what about the other half? Okay, now I have to preface this. Everything midriff down, although a downgrade, is not bad. I have seen way worse, especially in the collaborative line. Still pissed off that review got copyright struck. F***ers. It is, however, compromised. From a distance, it's not too bad, and a lot of these issues I didn't even come across until starting the scripting process. But by the same token, midriff. Flat as underscores corporate shuffle, hollow as the earth in the Monsterverse. But like both of those instances, it's intentional, not a side effect of laziness or poor budgeting. This is where the arms go in vehicle mode, so I do get it. And it still looks good from most angles, which is more than I can say for toys that suffer from similar issues. Also more than I can say for the legs, though. These are a mess. Thighs are lovely with their extra black paint, but what am I looking at here? Kneecaps sunken into the kibble, panels galore at the front, and what is this ankle tilt? Where's the rest of it? Like most are collaborative, this suffers heavily due to wanting to keep the alt mode pristine. Not as bad as his wave mate, and certainly not as bad as the shit collaborative has pulled before, but for f***'s sake, this feels almost unfinished. Weirdly though, I don't hate it. I should despise the way this looks, but it honestly doesn't bug me that much. I think the deco is doing a lot for it. The black convoy effect is very much a real thing, and it's pulling it hard. Plus your attention mostly gets drawn to the flames and wheels, which, yeah, sure, that's fine. You don't even notice the hollowness from the back, not that it's that bad anyway. Certainly better than the upcoming example. Yeesh. And hey, at least you get some killer bend with it. It is, in fact, that deep, and everything else mostly works well. It's really just that pesky ankle that pisses me off. Like, come on. At that point, it would have been better to skip the ankle tilt altogether and use that budget elsewhere. Otherwise, pretty standard articulation, minus a wrist swivel, but who cares. Accessory-wise, you get this gear shifter thing. Look, I get it's probably thematic to the design, but it looks stupid. And why did this have to be the only Autobot symbol on show? Couldn't you put it anywhere else? Red paint is lovely and it's built solidly, but it's still a bit silly for someone who's just a Transformers fan like myself. Probably missing some important context, but whatever. Bone Shaker's robot mode actually surprised me a lot more than I was expecting, but mostly in terms of the reflective look. I really loved the design when I first beheld it, but looking at it closer, yeah, it does have more jank than I initially realized. Still hasn't hampered my adornment, mind you. This is one stylish as toy. Curiosity with alt aesthetics aside, it's just a really nice deluxe, an uncharacteristically nice deluxe for collaborative, and for a reasonable price too. Yes, that's what happens when you smash the creativity of Hisashi Yuki, whom needs no introduction for those who've seen previous videos, and the chunk factor of Korki Yamada, a much newer designer who's had a spottier track record, sure, but has delivered some absolute bangers in recent years. I actually thought that initially this was a first for collaborative, showing off the designers proudly, maybe indicative of them using the regular team instead of whatever the collaborative team does on their own. But no, they've apparently been doing that since this abomination, which I completely forgot about because I've desperately tried to purge that shit from my mind. So it's probably more likely that they just let the Transformers team do their thing more, rather than slashing the budget and all we hold dear. Though if you want surprises, honestly, Twin Mill is a much bigger one, because going in, I expected to hate this thing. And yeah, don't get me wrong, it's still a Jankmeister. Proportions are all over the place, bits feel unfinished, and stability could definitely be better, but by the same token, this isn't bad. It's got the same charm and style as Bone Shaker, which I guess is fitting considering the same two designers worked on him. They definitely feel cut from the same cloth, which is appropriate. Head sculpt is, again, lovely, not as stylish as Bone Shaker, but still very nice. The blur influences definitely come across a lot more here, though it feels way more 2000s-y, like it jumped right out of Robots in Disguise 2001. Maybe this could work as a sideburn stand-in? I've seen some folks float the idea around, given the hatred for the Legacy outing. Funny though, considering this car design predates even Torso is lovely, using the existing shaping to its advantage. Now this is how you incorporate an iconic vehicle design into a Transformer. This is the real effing deal. Combined with a crisp and solid midriff, and this twink in shoulder pads is just about ready to hit the dance floor. Do wish said shoulder pads had the silver highlights that the prototype had though. Seems like a lot was cut from this release, which is a bit of a shame. The Aqua makes its return and it swapped out its Tron line stylings for a more classic 1982 Tron polygonal look. It really pops and helps make the shiny blue look complete, especially on those shins. Dear God, those look fancy. I kinda wish they were a bit deeper with their etching, but considering this has to form the underside of the car, I can cut it a lot of slack. And they really are beautiful. I mean, they even incorporated the exhaust pipes into the detail itself. That's damn fine if you ask me. Though, this is where you start to see the cracks form. For starters, the balance is way off. The thighs are super short even when you consider they're supposed to extend to the joint below. And the shins themselves are ridiculously long. Then you've got those beady little feet that do very little to ground him, and it's like, yeah, you really sacrificed this for the sake of the alt mode. Way more than Bone Shaker too, like, hun, come on. But the worst bit by far is the hollowness on the insides of the legs. I don't usually mind hollowness when there's a reason for it, and this definitely has a reason with the licensing constraints. But this this is just too much for me to overlook. Even on a good day, it's just there. Couldn't you do the old Combiner Wars dead end trick? Or have an extra panel in there? This is the same issue I had with Earthrise Double Dealer. It's too much. It's scaffolding. Going into this release, the hollowness was my primary issue with this design, and one of the two reasons I initially didn't pick this fellow up. The other was of course the parts forming, but after realizing it was creative weapon usage, that no longer became an issue. But you know what? I'm glad I did give this guy a chance, because this actually doesn't bother me that much. Yeah, I'm surprised too, this should piss me off, but it's honestly manageable. I think a lot of it comes down to his size, being a much smaller and compact deluxe. It's not as visible and out there as you'd see on a big computer screen. It's still there and a tad annoying, but not to the point where it ruins the figure. Maybe my judgment is clouded due to the fact I didn't pay retail for this, but even so, it's genuinely not that bad in my eyes. And overall, it's a remarkable robot mode. Not quite as resplendent and put together as Bone Shaker, but still rather good. Just wish the posing wasn't as rickety, but oh well. It's not hateful and you can still get most of the poses out of it. Only thing I really wish they'd done is allow the elbow joint to have a double joint, as the joints are there but locked off due to the robot mode sculpting. Had they made it a bit rounder, it would have been really nice, but oh well. You can fan mode it to achieve such, but it looks buckled and weird, so I don't tend to. Accessory wise, the intake and side exhaust sections become really cool underslung flamethrowers. Still not risking the flame effects, but they're nice regardless. You can even remove the intakes and hand mount them, cleaning things up and giving him twin pistols. It's a nice option, but I prefer the bulkier look of them still together. Without a trench coat, the aesthetic just doesn't do it for me. Still, lovely option to have. Twin Mill is janky in robot mode. The shins are naught but scaffolding when they could have easily put the extra kibble on the arms, especially as an original design. Not sure why the vast majority of modern Transformers are so allergic to arm-mounted kibble, but it is indeed a pattern and I have noticed it. But even so, he's still really lovely. The robot mode is very much a breath of fresh air amidst all the bullshit hypertune accuracy we see so much of these days. It accentuates style in other modes, instead of flat adherence to getting everything perfect for standing on a shelf. In both collaborative and the rest of mainline, so often they have several clear ideas and refuse to compromise on one or two, leading to an overall feeling of blah. This makes compromises where it needs to, and it leads to a better overall experience. And it's original, it's something new and exciting, born from the ashes of Hot Wheels nostalgia. I didn't go into these with nostalgia for the original designs. They were able to win me over with their own original charm, which isn't something I can really say for any other collaborative figure I've handled. Even Gigawatts and Tyrannicon, my previous favorites, leaned heavily on the brilliance of their War for Cybertron counterparts, especially the former, drawing from one of the best molds of the decade. There's more to these than just nostalgia, and for a toy line that's 95% nostalgia, 5% trying to slog the world with more Stranger Things merch, which itself is a nostalgic show for the 80s, so scratch that I guess. Point is, in a toy line where nostalgia is the main focus, that's a really nice change of pace. Surprise really isn't something you get often in the franchise these days. Every time they make something new, they have to beat it into the ground and ruin it, leading back to the same old safe nonsense with the same old safe characters. How's the 2026 lineup of Studio Series doing? Y'all ready to replace your War for Cybertron figures, even though they were already fantastic? Well, except that one, that makes perfect sense. And even at the level of quality we have, just being good isn't anything special. We're still in the golden age of the unification era. Things are slipping, make no mistake. But overall, we're still in an age of impeccable quality. You gotta give us something fresh, something exciting, and these figures are a rare case of that. I think both solidly fit into the same score. They've got their issues, but this isn't a case of their issues bringing the score down. They're easy enough to overlook, and there's enough class on show to get them above. Yes, you are paying an extra $10 for the licensing, and they do put the budget into smaller, denser, and better painted releases, which might not vibe with folks who prefer raw plastic value, parts count be damned. But they worked for it. They actually go the extra mile. They marry older styles of Transformers engineering we don't really see with modern slimness. I expected them to be fine, but these aren't that. They're damn fine. If anything, this is actually a worse case than if they were just outright terrible, because now I'm going to be second guessing all of the collaborative releases and actually thinking they're good. I mean, These actually have me excited for the upcoming releases next year, or I guess this year, because apparently this train isn't ending yet. I mean, a twin mill redeco seems like a safe enough bet, and the Scorcher seems like a fantastic design, though it might need toy hacks to truly shine. I really hope they don't just make the front of the car the torso, maybe give him wheeljack-styled feet, or have them on the shoulders or something. I don't want to be like this. Why do you have to give me hope? Ah well, maybe it is fool's hope, but for better or for worse, I'm on this train, on account of two pretty damn good releases. But as always, fan and public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on the state of collaborative below. Have you felt my distaste for these figures in the past, or have you always loved them? Do you have any hope for future releases, or do you feel they'll crash and burn now that they've got everyone's attention? Apologies for going silent for very long, it's been a crazy few months. Was half made redundant due to budget cuts where I worked, found work elsewhere, got sick due to the stress of constantly applying for work, dealt with finishing my capstone at university, finally got a job, worked ridiculous hours, got sick again, and then found out the job lied to me and was only a Christmas casual position, not a permanent one, so I'm back to square one. Then the Wi-Fi card died, locking me out of everything. Then my phone finally broke while trying to browse Instagram because no applications exist anymore and everything is just a Chrome wrapper with memory leaks galore. So now I'm finally back in a stable position and $2,000 in debt. Yippee! Legacy video is still coming and it's shaping up to be something quite spectacular, but it needs a bit longer. But until then, as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time, God, I need a break after this. Budgets are a tricky thing. Sometimes you can have the craziest ideas ever, only to slam headfirst into corporate reality. Sometimes you have a lineup of figures with all sorts of specific ideas, then the final members are hit with completely different cost allocations and you're left scrambling to figure out what to do. Should these budgets be f***ed with? Probably not. More often than not, it's just corporate barking at the door wanting an extra several billion in the bank, but regardless of circumstance, the designers always have to work around these new restrictions. I wish it wasn't so, as they likely wish the same, but you gotta do what you gotta do. And already collaborative as a whole can of budgetary worms on top of the expectation that fans will buy them anyway, leading to an air of complacency. More often than not, you've got the push and pull of both companies wanting more of a cut. Sometimes even the same company, just different divisions. Because apparently that makes sense. And yet, in spite of everything, the premier Hot Wheels Transformers managed to break through. While not perfect, they provided some of the most fun and inventive outings in recent memory, harking back a whole bunch to a classic Transformers style not seen as much these days. So often the robot modes are skimped on because the vehicle modes are the main focus, but here, these two were actually good, which meant the awesome vehicle modes were able to shine even more. Good toys being good. What a concept! However, it's difficult for lightning to strike twice. Just look at the downgrade from Legacy to Age of the Primes. When a toy line does well, corporate always comes knocking. They always want that sweet, sweet cash, and future toys are always given further restrictions that their predecessors did not. Coupled with the ever-increasing costs of toys due to everything going on in the world right now, these three kind of have the odds stacked against them. I really wanted to get unashamedly excited for these, but with the way everything is going, it just doesn't seem particularly responsible. But onwards and upwards. Nothing for it but to jump into these and see if they overcame the hurdles. Greetings, Cybertronians. I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis brings us back to the hopefully wonderful world of collaborative Hot Wheels figures with their second wave, Red Twin Mill, El Segundo Coupe, and GT Scorcher. Again, they really gotta come up with better names for these bastards. I know it's licensing stuff and all, but Mattel really gotta stop being so stingy. I'm just going to call them Coupe and Scorcher for the ease of things, and Twin Mill, because it's like Armada Hotshot with the Powerlinks deco. At least that's how I see it. You know, the car choices seem like the ones you'd have expected from the first wave. Like, think outside of the confines of the most popular Hot Wheels cars for a second. Aren't these sorts of rally and drifter loadouts what you primarily think of when you think Hot Wheels? No? Just me? Whatever. Wave 2 gives us two new molds in some fairly snazzy racing livery. And a redeco of Twin Mill, because Target always wants its red redecos. Seriously? No joke, they're the only reason we got Red Wing back in Siege. Target loves red shits and Stranger Things merchandise for whatever reason. Now, I'm going to try to not spend as much time on Red Twin Mill as the other two, as I've already discussed most of what this mold does in the previous review, but nevertheless, I'm actually pleasantly surprised with this one. In fact, I'm honestly debating which of the two are the better version. Might take some deeper analysis to pass this. This doesn't apply to the vehicle mode though. None of the new qualities really get to shine here, bar one. The Target Red is unfortunately not as shiny and resplendent as the original. It lacks that shiny fleck that made the original so great. After the the first release already had the fandom backlash of looking significantly worse than the prototype, as good as it did end up looking, mind you, this just reads a whole lot worse. It's not a bad shade, nice and rich with a lovely semi-gloss coat applied, but it is a step down. As is the stripes, it's far less encompassing overall, with a much simpler Jack and Meg White approach down the middle, given this is Target's MO after all. The stripes are done pretty damn well, the colour matching with the red is far closer, and I actually prefer the smoky grey window as it pops a lot more against the base red, whereas the original blue was a bit too light for my taste. You even get extra paint on the sides with some lovely Hot Wheels writing, much subtler and professional than the gaudy main symbol on the front. Not that it really makes up for the lost paint, but still. And I especially love that he has a much nicer Autobot symbol, one that doesn't get lost in the wispiness. These are all great qualities, they're just not a worthy trade-off for the worst base shade and step down in tamper graphing. Plus now the grey is also a much duller shade, making it seem far cheaper, and they've costed out the silver from the pipes on the sides. Big shame, I mostly just wanted them to tolerance these properly to avoid chipping rather than cut the silver entirely. Still, at least the flame effects work far better now, so that's a plus. Now none of these issues are figure damning, they do make him worse than the original Twin Mill in this mode specifically, but they don't ruin the design on the whole. Fact is, this is still a swish as car mode that rolls exceptionally, pushes the aerodynamicism to the max, and provides some lovely mechanical detail. And it's not like most of these are simply cuts, while some of it is definitely, a lot of it has instead been reallocated to the other mode. Base Twin Mill prioritized his vehicle mode a lot more, like a collaborative figure usually does, while Target Twin Mill more so shifts the balance in the robot's favor. Perhaps they were allowed to do such simply because Target was already footing the bill, but still. This is a nice car mode, and I'm sure I would have been blown away if I had experienced this with fresh eyes. That's the problem with discussing redecos within the same mold system. As I said last week, discussing all of the differences often makes the weaker of the two sound worse than it actually is. Even in cases where I do kind of hate the end results, it's hard not to sound overly negative without simply relisting all of the original points you made in the first review. If you prefer this deco for this mold, it's basically the same experience, so you're in for a good time. And hey, unlike the States, us Aussies actually have a much easier time coming across them thanks to the exclusivity not really being a factor. So yeah, all that push for the Target iconography and it doesn't even apply down under. It's funny, I actually used to work for Target many years ago, and it would seem even long after leaving, I can't escape this shit. The store doesn't even exist anymore, and they're still yelling at me in my dreams. I still would have much rather one of the fancier decos, such as the truly delightful turquoise I drew attention to last time, but given the circumstances, that was never going to be the case. We didn't know those circumstances at the time, but they were definitely the definitive push on getting this made from the context clues. We ultimately have what we have, and what we have is pretty good. Also, fun fact, apparently Spectraflame refers to the chrome paint style, not the specific version they picked. Guess I can chalk it up to the lack of Hot Wheels autism, and my partner being more into realistic cars than fantastical ones. Anywho, with the chip off the old block out of the way, we move into the new folks. This wave gives us some much more grounded releases, while the other two are definitely a lot more toyetic by virtue of focusing on the franchise's most nostalgic and recognizable designs. These two are a bit more wheel than hot. And I think it's a nice shift. It's a good change of pace, giving us a diverse lineup of cars to enjoy. Sadly, not a particularly diverse lineup of colors, as once again they've gone with red and blue though. I really wish we'd gotten some more variety here, as now the only figure that has a color all to himself is Bone Shaker, but oh well. Starting off with Coupe, he's probably the most reserved of the two. In fact, this alternate mode is easily the most reserved of the whole bunch. Much like Red Twin Mill, a lot of that comes down to his paint primarily being focused on in robot mode comparatively, but even so, he's got a good chunk to go around. I especially love the gold and red striping down the middle and on the sides. It's very vintage, giving this guy a very 60s vibe. Fitting as this design is described as retro-futuristic on the wiki, wherever they sourced that descriptor from. Interestingly, they've taken the design from a more recent Hot Wheels outing. This thing dropped in 2023 based on a carabiner design of a similar thing in 2022. Given the age of the franchise, you'd expect them to pick something a bit more timeless. Could this have been an AstroTurfed inclusion in the toy line? Not really, that's what we have Stranger Things for. Now, while Target Mill sadly pulled back on the plastic shade, Coupe actually brings back the subtle metallic effect on its blue. And it's just as resplendent. As resplendent as that fancy schmancy prototype? No, but hey, good to see this shade return, even if I would have preferred this in turquoise. The contouring is lovely, sort of Porsche-esque with its subtle curves, picked out with some delightful detailing too, such as the implied air intake on the front and the black window louvres. Also really nice to have included the back tail lights, again to be expected on a collaborative figure but not necessarily on a Transformer overall these days. As such, it's a nice touch. The front is also a delight, a crisp white splitter framing the whole thing. Phew, it's good having a non-binary finally I can just ask about car bits. Love you, honey. While some extra black on the air intake would have been that extra step, at least you get some nice headlights picked out. The larger ones do look a bit daft though. I get that there probably wasn't room in there for some clear inserts, but this does look a smidge gaudy. And speaking of clear, much like Twin Mill, though I don't think I mentioned it in the original review as it only occurred to me after making that video, I do feel the window shade could have been a bit more dyed. As it stands, there's just a whole bunch of robot bits on show in there. There's a fine line making clear plastic work properly, and while this isn't terrible, I do think Scorcher did it a lot better. Still, it's nice to have clear windows here. I've always preferred them to opaque, at least when done in the right circumstances. And they're tasteful enough where they don't take away from the livery, which is, again, wonderful. I especially love how the white continues all the way around the bottom, makes him really feel low to the ground, which isn't that what you want a sports car to do? Yes, I watched the Grand Tour now. I vaguely know my car stuff. I am very much a manly man with manly car knowledge, oh yes. There's not really much I can fault him with. Sure, there's not a lot that gets me insanely excited either, at least not to the extent of the others, but by and large, it's a solid car mode. The only gripe I have are these gaudy hinges on the sides, and unfortunately, it's a pretty big gripe to be honest. They really stick out to the point where they can practically be seen from any angle. Especially since this isn't a particularly new and inventive transformation, there had to be a better way to do this. Or maybe not, it could be Mattel not wanting to f with the chassis of the alternate mode. You know, like Lamborghini not wanting their bonnet split on Sideswipe and Sunstreaker, or Porsche not wanting their logo sliced through. Maybe it's in the same ballpark, but even so, there had to be a better way to fix this. Still, I guess you can imagine them as rocket boosters, linked to the blast effect compatibility at the back. While this weapon sadly won't become much in robot mode, it's fantastic to see more traditional blast effects return to the fray. Would have been nicer if these came in a standard set that was at general retail, but hey, a win is a win. Coupe's alt isn't amazing, but that's mostly because of the type of vehicle it is. It picks a pretty standard sports car design, pushes it to the absolute limit of the budget, and that's it. There's not a lot here that really springs out and goes crazy style-wise, unless you're a massive fan of this design or this style of car. The best it'll do is be a pretty good car mode. And that's what it does. It's a car that deserves respect. Even doing so with an obviously limited paint budget comparative to the last wave. But it also stays in its lane quite a bit, which may not be for everyone. Now, his retail wave mate is the opposite, really pushing what it's able to do within its allotted budget. Where it falters, it's quite noticeable, but where it succeeds, it really stands out. Right off the bat, this is one stylish car mode, hugging the ground with a stark black frame and blazing forth in a crisp red. The red is sadly more in line with Target Mill, so you don't get that fleck, and it's even a bit washed out with some of the detail, but fortunately you get enough of said detail to balance it out and push beyond. I adore the fiery clear orange, picking out the windows and implying a delightful engine block. It really helps the top half of the car stand out, especially because this is where you see a lot of that white paint scaled back. You'd expect it to continue out the back, which several depictions do show, but obviously they just weren't allotted enough to do so. That's okay though, they more than make up for it with the killer black down below. It's wonderfully stark and delivers a fantastic contrast, especially on the splitter. And this is where they start bringing back some of that livery. The wonderfully tasteful Hot Wheels text remains adorable, and the 8s are a really nice touch. Honestly, I just wish there was more of it. So much of the design just feels like it could have gone harder. No lights at the back, though part of it makes sense with the big chunk of unpaintable grey plastic. Only a tiny bit on the spoiler, though given this transforms, there's not really a lot of space here. The only part I actively feel could have been done better is the Hot Wheels text on the side. It cuts off pretty awkwardly, which, yes, that is how some depictions of the car do it, but those are all so tiny, limited by plastic space, and proper versions don't do that. They have the text shifted down so it's easier to read, and on basically a deluxe, it seems like a pretty daft choice. Mind you, I think plastering the Hot Wheels logo this broadly is daft in itself, but you know, balances and all. There are other annoyances too, such as the intake section being ridiculously hollow. This one makes sense, accuracy aside, it has to fold up into the torso. You probably would have come across a lot less gappy if there was some stuff underneath there, but even so, it looks way worse in photography than it actually is. It's pretty easily gotten over. The only part I actively get frustrated by is how the top section is just a sea of white. No Autobot symbol, no numbers, just a giant chunk of white tampographing. Given the white is a highlight color, not a main shade, this section really looks out of place. And yeah, I guess you could put some toy hacks here, if they actually made some sort of standard set that just improves the base idea, but no, chances are it'll be another random G2 character conversion set. I love these sorts of conversion sets, don't get me wrong, but in addition to standard sets. And it doesn't seem like the team is interested in those, which, fair play, you do you. But even then, you shouldn't have to do something like that. Accurate or no, the top section is just significantly significantly blander compared to everything else. Still, at least that blandness gets balanced out with some wonderful mismatched wheels. I know a lot of folk get kinda angry about these, but I really feel they give them some character. Especially since these are purposeful, not a budget kerfuffle they had to overcome. And hey, painted wonderfully too. Not as cool as the gold on Coupe, but still really nice. It's hard to talk about GT Scorch's vehicle mode because whenever you put his positives and negatives side by side, he seems a bit It's not an accurate assumption, but you can see why. A whole bunch of negatives versus a few key positives. He's light on the mechanical detail, janky on the paint, and hollow in areas he probably shouldn't be. But on the other hand, the dynamicism is off the chain, the base color choices are delightful, and the build quality is fantastic. The first wave was pretty dense plastic-wise, but Scorcher really pushes that denseness even further. He feels chunky and weighty, maybe not as much as Coupe, but definitely to a level where he feels quality. And ultimately, given he's going for a much more unique design even with all his faults, I'd say I prefer him to Coupe in this mode, and obviously Twin Mill by default. Still, again, 2 red releases in the same wave, even if one is an exclusive, it's still annoying. I genuinely reckon this would have done significantly better with some deco changes, so maybe if he gets a redeco in a wave or 2 later, he'll really get to shine. Though, for now, good alt mode, and probably my favorite of the bunch just on the shaping and coloration, quality aside. Faults and all, these make pretty good car modes. Is that to be expected? Yes, they are collaborative figures. It's very rare we get an alternate mode from this line that is, well, bad. But even so, these are the kind of alt modes I'd love to see more in regular Transformers releases. Of course, given the current trajectory of the franchise, that's unlikely to happen, so at least these 3, and of course these 5, are able to inject some fun into the release loadout, even for a bit. Will we get more? I'd bet money on it, given how well these continue to sell. And hey, there's a good chance the quality of the cars will remain the same, even if everything else ends up scaled back. God, I hope I'm not proven wrong on the vehicle mode quality. I really hope that sentence doesn't age poorly. Now, the engineering is sadly a step down compared to the last wave. It's not bad, don't get me wrong, but compared to what we were seeing previously, it's not as good. Though in fairness, they were living up to a lot. Of course, to save time like I have been so far, I'm not gonna bother showing the full transformation of Red Twin Mill. I've already got a full video covering the original with an in-depth transformation there, so you can just go watch that. So for this, all you're gonna do is done-a-rooney. And Coupe is also a transformation that will seem very, very similar, although I haven't reviewed this mold before, but I have touched on several figures that use the same system. Yes, this draws the same leg conversion from Combiner Wars Dead End, and all of its family members, Titans Return Chrome Dome and all of its family members, Legacy, Wild Rider, and Breakdown, and this is very much the same style, although it kind of goes to show this wasn't really acceptable. They could already do it really well, and yet they resorted to that. Come on, that's not cool. Well, first thing you want to do is remove the gun from the bottom there. Yes, it is parts forming, but it's weapon parts forming. Like with Twin Mill, it's okay. You want to untab these panels from the bottom, like so, which kind of makes sense given the transformation style. Shimmy this out just a little bit. That'll give you enough clearance to get the arms out, which will give you clearance for everything else. Unfortunately, these panels have a tendency to fall off. These are optional parts forming pieces, which I am not a fan of. But yeah, basically that just works the way you'd expect. Anyway, you take this panel and bring it to the front there. Locks in softly and also reveals the head. You can bring that panel up a little bit to get out of the way of the legs. Bring the legs down like so. And there's also a couple of other parts that are a bit of a downgrade compared to the previous usages of this transformation style. You can't get the feet out of there. Instead, you're supposed to take the tool, plug it in, and pull it out that way. Like, that to me is a bit of a cardinal sin with transformations. You shouldn't need a tool for something. You should just be able to use your fingies. Like, I don't even have the wonderful blue nails I had last week anymore. These are just my regular nails. And with those, I should be able to just get that out with ease. Hey, DrLockdown from the future here. It turns out that several commenters were in fact right, and you can actually transform this thing without the use of a tool using this tiny little clip part here. For whatever reason, I didn't notice it at the bottom. I was looking at the top of the foot. That one is on me, although I do think they could have made that a little bit more obvious in the sculpting. Anywho, you make sure that these panels are actually locked to the back of it so that it's nice and strong with its knees. Then you close it up, rotate the waist around, put the canopy however you like. I usually like to keep it down like that. Untab these from the sides and bring them around. Bring out the fists like so, and you are done. So yeah, it's definitely a transformation we've seen before, but it's not a very good application of it. It's just, this should be a hell of a lot easier. This should be a hell of a lot more satisfying. Oh yeah, and I forgot to bring down the shoulders. I always forget a step until the end. But this should be a lot easier. This should be a lot more fun because we've seen it done way more fun before. And this this just ain't it, Chief. Now, Scorcher hypothetically would be a lot clunkier because a lot of the clearances aren't that great with him, but it actually ends up being a little more fun than Coupe just by virtue of how clunky Coupe was with certain things. Does feel a little bit unfinished though, does feel a bit alternator-y, where panels just kind of go places and that's it. Unfortunately, the arms can actually be a bit confusing going in here. Unfortunately, the order of operations can be a little bit confusing. So first thing you want to do is kind of shimmy out these panels here. Just bring them out to the side ever so slightly, and that will allow you to bring these panels out and bring these legs down, which will give you enough clearance to move the arms out of the way, the fists out of the way, and the bit that kind of confuses me is the way it's all tabbed together, where this will untab from there, and then the arm panel will clip in there. When it's all together going back into the vehicle mode, it all seems very clunky. It's fine going to robot mode, and I am very glad I filmed things vehicle to robot, because it would be quite annoying otherwise. Anywho, the front bit untabs and folds into the torso, allowing you to bring this entire front section up and click it into place nice and solidly. The legs clip into place on the double hinges, although not particularly solidly, unfortunately. It definitely could be a bit better there. You bring the feet out like so and bring the ankles out like so. Nice and easily. Interestingly, got 5mm ports at the bottom there for all the combat system stuff. Surprised figures are still using it when they haven't really released any other figures for it. Anyway, you want to bring these panels to the back and don't fold in the ankle like I just did. Then this whole double hinge goes around the back and it just kind of sits there. Unfortunately, there's no locking point because the arms actually lock it into place there, and not very solidly, mind you. Finally, you want to rotate these bits around to the side like so, and you're done. And he feels like he should have another couple of steps, especially in that backpack. But no, the backpack is just one giant frame with clear pieces inside it. I do like that they've added some extra opaque pieces to clip everything together, so at least it's got some extra support there, but yeah, this definitely could have used more time in the oven. It's not quite there, but it's still fine. And hey, at least it's not committing any cardinal sins of transforming like Coupe was. These are definitely just not as fun. They're okay for desk toys, but they definitely could have used more time in the oven. It feels like they took these out a lot earlier just to get more product out there on the shelves, and they didn't leave as much time for them to really settle and really refine themselves. So, by default, Twin Mill, the redeco from the last wave, basically wins. And that's not really fair considering all the work was done previously before all the budget cuts, but I gotta be honest, it's just better than those two. But to make absolutely clear, not bad transformations. I've handled some transformations as of late, and these two are very much not it. Could be, but they're not. They're fine. Don't worry about it. They could be way worse. That's not a challenge, Hasbro. Please don't. Please don't make these like normal collaborative figures where it's just absolute dog shit. I'm warning you. Don't you dare. I've always loved when a robot mode is crafted from its vehicle specifically, when you can tell that it's a transformer instead of a non-transforming robot. Granted, the vast majority of figures are designed this way to the point where the few times they aren't, you can definitely tell. But you know what I mean, those specific releases that carefully build themselves from the alternate mode, like the old Classics lineup. That's what I really loved about the first wave, they very much walked the line wonderfully. Just some really creative uses of vehicle kibble, it was a wonderful sight to behold. But unfortunately, there's occasionally the other side of this style of engineering. Push it far enough and you sometimes get stuck with some very jank designs. And when you put these through the budget cut ringer, of course they're going to come out a little bit undercooked. Though with the simple redeco of the bunch, you wouldn't really be able to tell. He's carried himself pretty well, at least better than the vehicle mode did. Granted, his budgeting isn't as pronounced as they didn't have to sink extra cash into the research and development, but even so, yeah, this is pretty snazzy. The red interestingly comes across as far more vibrant in this mode, likely because it's being juxtaposed with more yellows and silvers instead of the generic target colors. It's a pretty good balance, and it completely rewrites the feel of the figure out of the Tron stylings and into a retro-futuristic race. The yellow and silver ratio is balanced pretty evenly down the middle, to great effect. They even brought back the silver shoulder bits that the prototype of standard Twin Mill had, but sadly costed out. So on a pure splotch for splotch count, the red version has a good bit more paint in robot mode specifically. Maybe that's why the vehicle mode was as scaled back as it was. Classic budget reallocation. You add more to one, you gotta take some away from the other. Just the way it is, I suppose. You do lose the trim on the lower shin detail though, so you're left with some rather sad tombstones that do stick out a little bit more up close. Pretty ignorable though, so it's hardly something to get that frustrated over. I still wish he'd had a more prominent Autobot symbol on his chest though, it's just begging for it. And yet the entire lineup almost seems scared of its Transformers branding. Interestingly enough, the head actually gives you some more paint too, with wonderful extra highlights on the head crest. This wasn't an idea yoinked from the prototype either, this is an entirely new addition, and I adore how it lights up the head sculpt. In fact, in general, I think the red really suits this head design a whole lot more. Actually, I'll even take it a couple of steps further as far as robot mode is concerned. I genuinely think this is a step up from the standard release, in vibes at least. If you compare apples to apples, they're basically on the same level, with the same hollowness and proportional issues. Nothing is really actively worse outside of the vehicle mode anyway, and I guess one minor annoyance I'll get to. But personally, I find this way more stylish. It's like the jump from Cybertron Hotshot to Excellion, giving us a much nicer deco for what would otherwise be the same great experience. The only part that's a genuine downgrade is the weaponry, and sadly not just with the coloration. Without the extra paint, it's a bit looser, so do be careful not to lose these flame pieces. Though maybe you would want to, given they're slightly duller than the last one. I'm guessing they were gang molded with the windshield, and thus are dealing with different color balancing f***ery. Who's to say, at least it's an easy enough fix compared to the actual damaging concerns of the original. Guess that makes it more of a side grade than a downgrade anyway. Target Mill is definitely playing on easy mode. All of the groundwork had been done already, and this even allowed him to sidestep all that pesky budget nonsense. But that's no reason to discredit him. Redecos and retools can be f***ed up. Quite easily, mind you. And this doesn't. Maybe the vehicle mode is a bit but it's still not bad. And that robot mode. God, it's sexy. Sexier than the original? Well, I reckon that's down to personal preference. This one does hit that Goldilocks zone for me, but for you, that really depends. But enough about the same old nonsense. Let's talk about the new hotness. How do the new molds fare? Alright, they're alright. Yeah, in an effort to specifically pick less toyetic cars, they've sort of sacrificed a lot of the proportional prowess that the last two had. Not to say that the last two were perfect with the nothing thighs of Glenn Miller and the ridiculously low shoulders of a shake, yeah, but you can tell from a glance that these have been far more compromised. So Coupe does seem to get around it with a pretty well realized robot mode. Well, he seems to get around it at first, at least. I mean, the torso seems pretty wonderful from directly ahead. Kinda bummed out all these cars use the front as the torso, with no one really doing anything crazy with the kibble, but as far as a simple car hood torso goes, this does pretty well. The livery and striping come across wonderfully, and the contouring works to the shape excellently. But then you notice it sort of just drops off. It's cohesive, but that cohesion has some weird deliberate choices. Like, look how far back the waist is compared to everything else, and how far forward the shoulders are. Maybe that's why his posing always seems so awkward. He's got plenty of articulation, but none of it seems to work that well, and it makes the cool details such as the torso not really get their day in the sun. Will say, the legs do look fantastic though. The white coat really helps this pick out all the stepped layering. It feels as if it would be right at home in Titan's Return, minus the mid-2000s oddities the aesthetic would sometimes give. I also really like how they've, with both releases mind you, taken feedback with the legs and gotten rid of that stanky hollowness. Not that it was that bad on the primary sufferer, mind you, especially at the size, but still, good to see improvement. And it all contrasts wonderfully with the silver thighs, nice and chunky, which can be a problem with this sort of conversion, especially the further back you go. Sure, said conversion to Getty was a bit confusing with how it all lines up, but still, these legs are pretty good. Though this kind of white segmentation would have been great up top because the shoulders are just a sea of out-of-place white paint. There's so many cool details here that could have been picked out really well, but instead they just get caked over and washed out. Ironically, using less paint would have made this look way better, because as it stands, they look like they're from a completely different figure. And again, even though you shouldn't have to, you can't even fix this stuff with toy hacks because chances are they'll try to turn him into, I don't know, G2 Hydra Head or something, and still no standard set, kind of a bummer. They look even weirder next to the beady little forearms, so tiny and clashy going from this to this. In fact, the whole design seems to clash with itself. Blue torso, white shoulders, black arms, a grey pelvis, silver thighs, white and blue shins. For such a simple design, it's a bit much. You can streamline it though with some optional parts forming on the forearms. This isn't really my thing, I'm a bit of a parts forming hater, at least for stuff that doesn't become a cool weapon or a combiner bit. So I won't personally ever use this, but it's a nice option, as is the weapon. It's a bit daft, but it's a really fun integration of the exhaust system and a great way to bring back blast effects. Now the head sculpt, I'm a bit torn on. Style-wise, it's a great fit for the design, looking like one of the pit crew in a rally qualifier. It's like a mix of Ironhide and Red Alert, real down to earth, but still with that racing vibe. My main issue is the light piping, or rather how they've just got rid of it and replaced it with this really shitty shade of red. What did Thew Adams call it? Denied piping? I think that was it, and it's a real shame. I get that the system has somewhat fallen out of favor with a lot of modern collectors, but I remain a big fan of the gimmick, and seeing it squandered is somewhat of a downer, especially with the red looking as dull as it does. Granted, I get red is a really difficult color to do given pigment depth and all. Yes, I should finally have an explanation for why red and yellow are a bitch to get right up when this video goes live. But even so, it's a bit of a letdown. And yet, that's not what I tend to notice up here, not even the shoulders, mind you. Interestingly enough, the salient feature is the gold wheels. Yes, for whatever reason, these seem to be the biggest thing on show, and they look cool as shit. I feel between those, the torso and the shins, the design really does pull forward. It's a tug of war between its prestige and its jank, and I reckon the former ultimately pulls through at the end. I do wish the shoulders were a bit more articulated though. Proportional issues aside, he uses the ever-dreaded trigger-happy shoulders. While I personally don't mind its usage, these don't have a lot of range to them, especially outwards. You'll eventually be able to get some decent poses out of the guy, but you really do have to work for it. He's a reasonably dynamic piece, but he doesn't initially give that feeling. He feels more like the kind of figure that would excel in a standard A stance, but spend enough time with him, and you realize his strengths actually lie elsewhere. Segi seems pretty simple, but he's actually the most complicated figure to talk about in the whole lineup. The more time I spend with him, the more time I like him. That's not necessarily the mark of an excellent figure, and this isn't quite excellent, but it is quite good. This is part of why I like doing these analyses so much. Shining a spotlight on figures like this really helps me pass some of my thoughts with them, and I'm not sure I would have appreciated Coupe otherwise. He's far from perfect, and once again I think the first wave trumps him, but he is a figure I'm ultimately glad I was able to behold. Now Scorcher is a lot simpler. He wears his heart a lot more on his sleeve, for better or for worse. He's a boy who is really wide and really flat, very Alternators-esque, especially in his upper torso. Though a lot of that is exacerbated by the wheel positioning. I get what they were going for, but with the wheels this small, it just comes across as wide for the sake of wide. Especially as there's the wide chest, then shoulder, then chunk, then wheel. It's a lot to get through, though the torso paint does contribute with the transparent orange block in the middle and the white framing the whole thing. I reckon it would have done better had it been at a slight angle, but I imagine they're being purposefully conservative with their design, so it's a limitation I totally get. And hey, the detail is exquisite on the chest and shoulders, a real treat of racing pipes and extra vents. Even the collarbone section is carefully picked out with careful layering and faux panels, as if they had folded in during the transformation. Bit of an odd place to shove a bunch of the detail, but it works pretty well. The pelvis section is gorgeously painted, kinda odd we're getting two gorgeously painted pelvises back to back, but hey, it works with this silver and black combo. And that paint continues to the delightful thighs, working exactly in line with their folding detail, quite similar to Classic's Mirage. Still a great figure, honestly I believe it's the best G1 styled Mirage to this day. Miss me with that 3-pack with the haphazard tacked on shoulder thingo. Now the shins, I get what they were going for, and for the most part I think they pull it off. It's the same compromises Twin Mill ran into, with the sculpting not being as etched into the plastic as they would have wanted. There's hints of greater sculpting and layering, but it just gets stuck with the lack of room it's afforded. Not helped by the giant chunk missing either, it's just gone. This has a lot working against it. It so easily could have been an absolute shit show. So it's a good thing the red paint goes incredibly hard. The red and black combo gives the illusion of depth pretty effectively, like it's an actual successful version of what the Virtual Boy was going for. I honestly think the only part that actively bothers me is the chunk on the knees. I do think they should have redesigned these to better work with the way the clearance is supposed to fit. They do try, but this probably could have used a ground up rework from the concept art stage. Could it be another case of licensing kerfuffles? Probably not. Unfortunately, unlike last time, we don't know who worked on these, so I can't look into their backlog and see why they made the decisions they made. Hey, DrLockdown from the future here. I actually ended up reaching out to the illustrious Evan, and off the top of his head, he did say he could be mistaken, but it seems as if this was designed by Yuya Onishi, who's appeared on this channel a few times before with some absolute masterworks of Transformer design. He's definitely known for going out there and creating some crazy transformations, so maybe this one just needed a once-over. But hey, it's not hateful, and the design overall isn't either. It's a really nice red Genericon with a pair of black pants. Wait, is this supposed to be a pit crew again? I mean, dead, that's clever. Probably why his head sculpt is so fresh-faced. Probably could have used some black to tie the whole thing together, but it's still quite nice, and the light piping is killer. I'm never going to complain about light piping. Bring back the light pipe revolution and pump it into my veins. Scorcher is definitely the more ambitious of the two newer designs, playing around a lot more with his proportions, and I think that does lead to a much weaker robot mode. But much like last review and my undying love of Constructicon Maximus, I genuinely prefer robots like that over safe bets that do things cromulently. And the flaws he does have are more just annoying jabs in your shoulder that a high school acquaintance would do when bored, not something that actively causes harm. Not like he's zapping you. Y'all remember zaps? Those were awful. Not even the giant chunk at the back. Yeah, it would have been nice if it folded up, but it's backpack kibble. I've seen way worse, and at least you get a nice sturdy frame around the transparent window piece. My only genuine gripes are with the articulation. Make no mistake, he does have a lot. Everything you could reasonably want is here, but there are 2 points where it does bug me. Firstly, you've got the knees. These just keep untabbing. Instead of having a nice sturdy tab section, you've got this really loose clip that hooks over and accomplishes not much. Bit of a bummer, but you can work around it. And the same can sort of be said about the other issue, kinda. With the way the arms work, they end up being hinged so far out that it looks super jank, not to mention you have to angle the wheel out of the way, which looks so incredibly daft. And because of the way they angle, he never looks dynamic in any pose you put him in. No matter how hard you try, he ends up looking a lot clunkier than he actually is. For as alternators-esque as his vibe brings, those figures were at least a lot more expressive. It's a bit not gonna lie. But there is a solution. See, these shoulders fit into the torso on very loose pegs, we're talking about as loose as the knees. Now, this would be an issue if you don't want the torso on pegging during normal posing, or do you? Turns out if you use these transformation joints instead of the dedicated ones, he actually poses a lot more naturally. Yes, you get stuck with trigger-happy shoulders once again, but this is not a channel that discriminates against shoulder styles. Only shitty applications of said styles, and weirdly, this isn't that. Now, this does make the backpack a bit wibbly if you try to pose both shoulders this way, but if you're clever, you can really make this guy look sleek. Doubly so with the introduction of his hidden weapon stored in his spoiler. A fantastic use of onboard weapons, and a great addition for the posing. Like that toy guy once said, though I'm definitely paraphrasing here, add a sword to a figure and the posing really gets to shine. Then probably something about a minor wheeljack, I don't know. Also gets to be used as a double blade, but it doesn't work as well. I just tend to use them individually. Now yes, you shouldn't have to use all these fancy schmancy workarounds to fix what is essentially a design flaw. The posing is kinda jank, and it does make you work for the dynamicism that the others sorta just have baked in. But those workarounds aren't that taxing on any play session, and they lead to quite a lovely robot mode overall. Not an amazing robot mode, and I still don't think either of these two are on the same level as the last batch, but it's a nice robot. If I had to rank these three, I'd put Scorcher as the weakest, then Coupe, then Red Twinmill. The last two would probably fit somewhere after Coupe, but I'm undecided as of now, given I'd need to spend more time with them. An unfortunate side effect of earlier reviews and weekly uploads, I'm afraid. Ignore the delay last week. Pretend it didn't happen. But that's not to say Scorcher is a bad figure. The jank he does have is still incredibly charming, at least compared to what a lot of modern accuracy first figures do with their abysmal sacrifices. These are a step down, make no mistake, but in this world of endless accuracy and G1 toy line checkboxing, they are once again a nice reprieve. Quality aside, they still give me the same joy as the last two outings, only this time I'm not so blindsided by it. Does that excuse them, especially Scorcher? No, but it is a context that has to be considered. You may look at designs like these and scoff because there's definitely a greater tug of war between designer expectation and plastic reality. That's fine, but I'm not that reviewer. I'm the reviewer who finds these a fun detour in collecting, and if they keep this up and don't drop to a further level below, I'll continue to find them fun. How you phrase something often has a certain power on how it's perceived. You can say the exact same set of words, but it can have entirely different meanings. In this case, these figures are good, but they are still impacted by their budgetary constraints, is very different from these figures are impacted by their budgetary restraints, but they are still good. And for all their faults, I do think the latter is more true of the second wave. Even when caked in subtle layers of jank, they still provide a wonderful set of inventive figures that work as a nice distraction from the endless mediocritization of generations. They are definitely fighting an uphill battle, and I think the redeco ultimately ends up being the best of the three by default. But they are fun, and they are worth the price, at least in Australia. If that price increases in Wave 3, who can say? Probably not, but we'll just have to cross that bridge when we build and jump off it. And who knows if the corporate glove will squeeze around their necks further? Who knows which threshold we'll end up crossing as this line continues? But for now, these are genuinely good, especially worth the pickup if they're on sale, and most likely at full price if you really vibe with these designs. I'm honestly relieved these turned out as well as they did. I was starting to worry that this channel was just turning into DrLockdown shits on modern Transformers for the 16th week in a row, with the way my review lineups have been going. As good as it is for the algorithm, I don't think I have the innate ability to consistently make modern Transformers suck videos week in, week out. For the sake of my own sanity, I have to engage with figures that I like. I have to talk about the things I'm passionate about. And at least here, I'm glad these three figures gave me that opportunity, compromised as they may be. I'm just hoping things stay this way. I want to continue loving these figures as I have for the past two videos. There are rumblings of things going the other way. but I really hope to be proven wrong about that. But as always, fan and public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on the trajectory of Hot Wheels Transformers crossovers below. Are these of the quality level you vibe with, or is this too much of a step down? Do you think the next wave will be even worse, or will they perhaps remain at the same quality? Or maybe even be better? Unlikely, but it's possible. But until the day we find out, as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time.